The December 1st meeting of the Environment and Public Works Committee will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Barker. Here. Chairman Cassetti.
Here.
Mr. Colby.
Here.
Mr. Haney.
Here.
Mr. Howland.
Here.
Mr. Hyder.
Here.
Mr. O'Brien.
Here.
Okay. Before we get started, I just wanted to congratulate a couple of members of one member of the committee and one former member of the committee. I want to congratulate Legislator O'Brien for his election to the leadership of the Minority Caucus. Good luck to you, Ted. Congratulations. And also, I'd like to congratulate a former committee member, Harry Bronson, on his recent election to the New York State Assembly. Congratulations, Harry, wherever you are, and we'll miss you. Okay. Is there anyone signed up for the public forum?
No, sir.
Is there anyone present who is not signed up who would like to speak before the committee at this time? All right. Next, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce Director Scott Adair, Chief Finance Officer of the Finance Department, who is here to present the 2011 budget, proposed budget, I should say, operating budget as it pertains to the Environment and Public Works Committee. After the presentation, we'll have a question and answer period following the presentation. Director Adair?
Thank you, Chairman Cassetti, for the opportunity this evening to present the County Executive's 2011 proposed budget. As we start out the presentation, we'll go through a few slides of just the general overview of the overall budget, and then we'll get into more specifics on what affects this committee, the Environmental Public Works Committee. First and foremost, we start out with the total operating budget. As everyone here knows, there's two components to our budget. There's an operating budget and there's a grants budget. The overall operating budget for 2011 is proposed at $931 million. That's a 1.9% increase over the 2010 budget. In the areas of mandated spending, we're up 3.7%, primarily driven by payments to our sharing partners as far as the sales tax agreement goes, and also an increased caseload in DHS. In the non-mandated area, we're up less than 1%, which is in compliance with the Taxpayer Protection Act for 2011. And that really is what I'll refer to as noise, a bunch of numbers moving around, no one specific thing kind of to tag to from a non-mandated area. In the area of debt service, we're down approximately 10%. That 10% drop is due to a number of things, and one of them, something that we've talked about for at least the last 2 years, was the refinancing that we did in 2008. We're still seeing savings from that at this point in time. In addition to that, the most recent borrowings that we've done for the county, we've obtained lower than average rates for ourselves, and that's lowered our debt service costs overall. The last area in this particular slide is the non-mandated user fee, which is really probably the primary focus of this group because the Pure Waters and the airport, two areas that are covered in my presentation for EPW, the majority of their expenditures reside in this area. That was down 0.3% from last year to $89.1 million. The other items inside of that non-mandated user fee supported is the hospital fund. The hospital fund, thank you, sorry. In 2011 operating budget broken up by functional areas on the next slide. This evening we'll spend the majority of our time in the environmental area, which is 9.2% of the overall operating budget, and a small portion of that is also included in transportation. The aviation department is included in transportation at 5.8%. As you can see, some of the larger expenses as you go around the wheel include public safety, our payment to our municipal sharing partners, and the human services area. It is important to note that both the environmental area, functional area of the budget, and the transportation area of the budget are down from last year by approximately 0.9%. Again, not to belabor the point, but the transportation piece is made up of DOT as well as aviation, and DOT will be covered in the next committee meeting. The 2011 operating budget as it's proposed today and where the money actually comes from, really the largest driver of that, as we all know, is property taxes. This year we've maintained in the 2011 proposed budget our property tax rate at $8.99. We are basically getting approximately $3 million in additional revenue in the property tax area, and this is all based on the assessed growth that we've had in the community over the last year of approximately 0.9%. Some of the other areas that are important to point out to this particular committee, the revenues in environmental, the revenues in aviation are really user fees, I'll call them, and so they support the operations, but probably the biggest one that we don't talk a lot about, and it's the smallest component of the pie, is predominantly in this particular area of EPW. The Pure Waters funds themselves are providing almost that entire amount of fund balance, with one exception to the library fund of approximately $200,000. So Pure Waters is using its fund balance as we move forward to keep ratepayers at level rates from last year. In the next slide, we talk about the second component to the overall budget, which is our grants budget. The grants budget is not a part of this particular committee. It's really focused in the area of human services and public safety, with some small pieces going to Rec and Ed for the Parks Department. Overall, the grants budget is up 1.7% from last year. Grants budget, as you can see on the next slide, human services is the largest component of that. 68.4% of the grants budget goes to human services, followed by 19.9% going to health services. The overall budget, as we speak to many times, we talk about the mandated, non-mandated portion of it. For 2011, as it's proposed here today, the mandated portion of this budget, mandated by both federal or state regulations, is 82%. The non-mandated portion is 18%. Mandated expenses by functional area, again, not a lot in this particular committee are covered under this area. The majority of these expenses for this particular committee are in the non-mandated area, but there are some in the environmental, the Pure Waters. All the Pure Waters districts are considered to be mandated, as well as the recycling part of the solid waste fund is considered to be mandated. There are very few mandated costs for the airport. That is almost predominantly non-mandated services. Non-mandated expenses by functional area, as you can see here, $13.3 million for environmental things. That includes both the Pure Waters administration, the lab and the GIS charges, and all of solid waste with the exception of the recycling facility. And in transportation, again, almost the entire part of the aviation budget is included in the non-mandated area. Turning now to the more specific slides that relate to the Environmental Public Works Committee. We'll talk a little bit about each one of them, just kind of scratching the surface to give you some highlights as to what's happened during this last year, and then we'll go into a question and answer session regarding any other details that you'd like to have answered for you. In the area of aviation, you'll notice here that the aviation fund is self-supporting. All of its charges, all of its expenses are reimbursed through the Monroe County Airport Authority. That's both for operations and debt service. Their appropriations are up this year, approximately $800,000. Two big components driving that difference, one of them being debt service. As everyone knows, we've issued some debt for the airport in the last couple of years, and now we're starting to see that payback come in, and we're starting to see their debt service ramp up as far as their expenditures go. Also included in there for the airport and the Department of Aviation, it is a personal services and benefits driven area, and benefits all by themselves are up $500,000 from the prior year. Most of that is attributable to the retirement costs that we see going up continually throughout the state. Moving on to environmental services, the largest component of the Environmental Public Works sector committee. Again, the environmental services is a self-supporting fund or self-supporting fees, as you can see here. If you recall from last year's presentation, we went through many, I'll call them gyrations to change the overall presentation of the Pure Waters, primarily Pure Waters budget, where we moved a lot of the personal services out of the individual districts into an overall administrative code, and then we do a charge back through the internal accounting mechanisms that we have here in the county in order to charge those back appropriately. So they don't, where they used to start out in the actual districts, those funds are now, those expenses are now accumulated and transferred out as they are incurred. This creates a little bit of a comparison issue if you're looking at the detail in the back of the budget book, where 2009 numbers and 2010 numbers in a lot of cases drop off to be zero and get to be a little confusing for folks. But the primary driver, again, behind that is really an accounting change for us to be able to charge back in a more timely fashion the actual expenses that are incurred by each of the Pure Waters districts. Again, overall appropriations in the environmental services, and we'll go into a little bit of the divisions inside of environmental services in a minute, are down approximately $500,000. We really need to focus on the total appropriations because the service chargebacks is what happens when we take the payroll that's all included in the administrative function and spread that back out to the actual Pure Waters districts, and that's the largest component of the chargebacks. Speaking of Pure Waters, we move into their appropriations side of things. Appropriations for Pure Waters are essentially flat, up about $700,000 from last year. And these are just normal cost of living type increases. You'll see it as we go through the details, I'm sure. But salaries or benefits are up, probably the primary driver of this. It's interesting because we do have some other things going on there, but they're just so massive as far as in small numbers changing that they don't necessarily amount to a whole lot. But the reality of it is that the increased appropriations are caused by the benefits associated with the employees for those particular funds. Next slide shows what we've done as far as the Pure Waters fee schedule for 2011. Pure Waters fee schedule remains flat from 2010. So there's been no increase to any of the districts regarding Pure Waters rates. It's important to note how we've done that this year. Again, as I mentioned earlier on, we've appropriated fund balance in the Rochester Pure Waters District and in the Northwest District. In addition, in the Rochester Pure Waters District, we've provided approximately $2.3 million of cash capital in their budget for different capital programs that they'd like to pay for out of their current operating budget. Moving into the engineering and facilities management area, again, these appropriations are up slightly, and the primary driver of these appropriations being up slightly from last year is in 2011, we will bring 2 new buildings online. The crime lab will come online hopefully by June or July of this year. In addition to that, the pediatrics center over on East Henrietta Road, or the campus where Westfall and the Monroe Community Hospital are located, is open and available for service at this particular point in time. Those have required us to increase some of the operating expenses associated with that facility, or those facilities. In addition, we've seen some other reductions in engineering and facilities management that kind of get eaten up because of the overall increases because of bringing 2 new buildings online. In the division of solid waste, you'll notice here a rather large decrease as far as the appropriations go, approximately $1.4 million. This large decrease is essentially due to one fact, and that fact is that we have paid off our COPS, or our Certificate of Participation. It was a liability that we incurred regarding the resource recovery facility years ago, and we've made the final payment on that debt, and so that debt has effectively dropped off the budget at this point in time. The last area that I want to talk about, again, is a self-supporting area in the Department of Environmental Services, and it's our Fleet Services Center. You'll notice here that the appropriations are relatively flat from last year. There's a small revenue amount. That's revenue that we get from our municipal partners that share we provide services to at Fleet Services. Again, the overall appropriations are flat, and that's caused by a number of things. The first thing you would say is that gasoline prices are down for 2011, and it's anticipated that they will drop. The drop is included in the budget, but there are other items that are going up, which ultimately get you to an offset for the decrease in fuel costs. With that, that concludes my presentation for the Environmental Public Works Committee, and Chairman Cassetti will be willing to take any questions that anyone has. Thank you.
I'll open this up to discussion to members of the committee. Are there any questions regarding this presentation? Legislator Colby.
I know by looking at the monthly or the quarterly reports from the solid waste at the landfill that the tonnage is down. Is that reflected going forward, or how did you handle that? Because that directly reflects on how much revenue we get, right?
Through the chair, that's correct. And as you'll notice in the revenues that are provided for in the 2011 proposed budget, there's, I'll call it a significant drop in the tipping fees that we anticipate from that particular location.
All set, Legislator Colby? Legislator Hyder?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, just following up on Legislator Colby's question. So why is there a significant drop in that?
Through the chair, that relates to decrease in consumption, people holding on to things and really disposing of things less, if you will. But really, we're seeing it at the landfill. We're seeing it at the transfer hall station, roughly in the order of a 15 to 20% drop in volume.
Can you restate the last part? I didn't
Sure.
understand.
We are seeing a drop that ranges from 15 to 20% in volume as a result of the reasons that I just shared. Again, primarily a decrease in consumption.
And is this, through you, Mr. Chair, do we accept solid waste from areas other than just Monroe County? As a revenue source?
Through the chair, Mill Seat Landfill can accept waste outside of Monroe County, but not outside of New York State in the area around New York City.
So through you, Mr. Chair, are we looking at those options to make up the decrease in revenue?
Through the chair, that's a responsibility certainly that Waste Management, our operator at Mill Seat Landfill, is pursuing. The volumes that you see here in the budget book are primarily related to volumes that we receive at our transfer hall location, where we're taking primarily city waste at that location out to the landfill. That's where we see those revenues reflected here coming in.
No, yeah, I think I understand the reason now. I guess I was looking at as a way to rectify the 17% reduction. And so you're having those conversations with Waste Management as looking in terms of options for increasing new ways to get more solid waste.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. Let's see, through you, Mr. Chair, switching to the airport. Mr. D'Amelio here.
Through the chair, he's on his way. We will attempt to answer any questions.
All right,
that
and if we can wait, you might be able to answer this, Mr. Adair. Through you, the airport fuel facility appears to be zeroed on the current budget with no appropriations listed for the 2011 budget, although this division had about $300,000 in expenses last year. Did this 2010 expense include debt service for Capital Fund 8979? This capital fund does not appear in the 2011 proposed budget. How has this been paid off?
Through the chair, I don't know the specific capital fund, but this particular project is paid off at this particular point in time.
Okay. Thank you. And through the chair, where will the new household hazardous waste facility be located? And what can you give me an overall view of the scope, timeline, and cost of the new project?
Through the chair, we are still studying our options associated with the future of the household hazardous waste site. Again, ideally, we want that centrally located. We don't have a specific budget, but we're expecting next year to break ground and have that facility hopefully operational by the end of next calendar year.
So if you're going to break ground next year, when do you anticipate actually choosing the site for you, Mr. Chair?
I would expect through the chair in certainly the early part of the first quarter of next year.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the solid waste fund went from having a $0 unreserved fund balance to a negative $1.7 million fund balance. Can you explain why?
Through the chair, one of the things that we have to look at in the solid waste fund is the unrestricted net assets are, you're correct, in the $1.7 million deficit. The total net assets for the facility are approximately $3.7 million. What we're seeing here is where it's kind of an interesting picture, because when you project it out, it sort of hits a dip and then starts to recover itself, to dig itself out of the hole that it's in the unrestricted fund balance or unrestricted net assets at this point in time. The projections are that this will come back out of the negative by probably the end of 2011, I think is what the projection is. It may be 2012. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But this is caused by what is actually happening out there with the decrease that we're seeing in tipping fees and the standard or consistent expenses that go along with operating the landfill or the solid waste fund.
Okay. And through you, Mr. Chair, the solid waste fund ran a roughly $4.1 million loss in 2009 and a cash loss of about $1 million. What's being done to correct and address the situation?
Through the chair, what we continue to do is look at the operations to determine where we can eliminate or reduce expenses or provide additional revenue opportunities to change that picture from a cash standpoint. As we're all aware of, from an accrual standpoint, it's going to continue to spin off slight losses here until we kind of turn the corner on the debt service piece of this project.
So what are some ways, through you, Mr. Chair, that you look to address the revenue side of the equation?
Overall, through the chair, I guess one of the biggest things would be looking for tipping fees to increase or the economy to improve from that standpoint and develop that revenue stream coming back from where it is today. So there really isn't a magic bullet for the revenue side of things. Again, as the environmental services continues to be involved in the operation of the facility, they'll continue to look at ways to save or reduce expenses to try and limit the losses that are being incurred right now. In the budget, it talks about the departmental objective to consolidate the MS4 permit compliance with the countywide district for stormwater regulations. Through you, Mr. Chair, can you explain how we will create this new special district?
Through the chair, we are again exploring all opportunities associated with that, building on the successes that we've had through the County Stormwater Coalition and all the municipalities that participate in that Stormwater Coalition to meet unfunded mandates from the federal government administered through the state. Again, I think we've achieved great efficiencies. We've been successful in securing state grants, but those grants will eventually cease, most likely. But again, we're recognized, the county is recognized in our efforts to meet the demands of this unfunded mandate. But the short answer to your question is we're exploring all options, and we're looking very carefully at options that may involve Pure Waters taking on some of that responsibility. And again, those are discussions that would likely have to happen at the state level to allow that to occur. But again, we're exploring options so as to minimize any impacts to local government, if you will, finding more efficiencies and not having to create additional districts to meet the need.
And through you, Mr. Chair, what would you anticipate the timeline for those discussions and that decision? Through the chair,
that will be ongoing through 2011. I'm hesitant to give a specific date, but certainly we'll be pursuing that in earnest.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, again, in the departmental objectives, it states that the department will begin procurement for a second Mill Street landfill gas energy facility. Can you give us a little bit more idea about the scope of that and the details, as well as the timeline for that project?
Certainly. Through the chair, and again, I would add that to the items that Mr. Adair identified as potential additional revenue sources. We are in the process of developing a scope and fee for a team to develop, to design and operate a new power plant with gas from the landfill. We are in those discussions now. We will come before this honorable body to approve contracts with that group. Again, we're still in negotiations, but again, that's a project that we expect to implement next year. And if all goes well, break ground. But again, we're still firming up our schedule on that and looking at, balancing available gas and what opportunities exist there for additional revenue source.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, just so I understand, I mean, and I think that the previous project was a great one, but didn't we earlier identify that there's been a real decrease in consumption, that there's not as much waste being produced? So, is there a real can the market bear another whole facility there at this point?
Through the chair, the gas that's really being produced now would continue to even grow, even without additional waste going through the gate, because it's cooking, so to speak, and continue to produce methane. So I don't see that having a significant impact in the near term.
Okay, thank you. Also, another departmental objective that was identified in the 2011 budget that I had a question about through you, Mr. Chair, talks about updating the solid waste and recycling laws. Can you talk a little bit about that for me?
Sure. That would be an outcome from, through the chair, developing and updating the solid waste master plan, which we're doing, which is approximately 20 years old now, and your honorable body approved that consultant contract. And from there, we're exploring opportunities and looking to the future as what we can do more with solid waste and recycling in our community, certainly taking a look at the past 20 years, but also looking forward to other opportunities. And some of those that we may identify and agree are worthwhile to pursue may be updated and reflected in the laws that you referenced.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. One other question for now, then I know my colleagues have some questions as well. In regards to building operations through you, Mr. Chair, why have the chargebacks for City Place been steadily declining? Specifically, it was $2.6 million in 2009, $2.5 million in 2010, and then $2.3 million projected for 2011. Can you please explain that?
Through the chair, the primary reason for that is the cost of utilities have been declining.
Thank you very much.
Legislator Colby, you had another question?
Chair, just to follow up on that gas question and relating it back to the budget, the second phase of the gas generation plant, is any of the potential revenue, net revenue figured in this year's budget, or if that comes, or right now you don't have none of that figured in?
Through the chair, we do not have that figured into our budget at this point.
So if you do get a plan in place, that'll be a net gain for us during the mid-year.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Legislator O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through you to the administration, following up on one of Legislator Hyder's questions, we talked about the tipping fees in the solid waste area being budgeted to see a decrease in collections, and there was some explanation for that. Is the other revenue stream in solid waste, the sale of energy, also looks like it's decreasing by about 10%. But I know that you've indicated that. Well, what would be the reason for that? Is it the same kind of a reason that the tipping fees are down? Less product?
Through the chair, no, it's actually not a function of volume across the gate. It's really directly a function of what we can sell the energy for on the open market. So we're budgeting a lower amount that we can sell the energy, not a lot, but again, that's the reason for that decrease.
Okay, and thank you. And maybe you could describe for me, if you could state it simply, which is the only way I can understand things, but how the county's net take from energy sales is derived, or how do we calculate what we derive as a county from energy sales?
Through the chair, we take gross revenue, we subtract operations and maintenance cost for the operator, we subtract a debt service, we have a low interest loan with NYPA, we share in revenue between Waste Management and Monroe County at 58% and 42% respectively. So the net revenue for the county is $460,000.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, in the Pure Waters area, I note that the Gates-Chili District and Irondequoit Bay District, there are not chargebacks from the Rochester Pure Waters District, and I'm wondering if there's a way that the Rochester Pure Waters District gets reimbursed for treating the Gates-Chili, Ogden, and Irondequoit Bay District sewage at the Van Laer plant. Is there a reimbursement that's other than a chargeback?
Where is that? Through the chair, GCO contributes roughly 10% of the flow at Van Laer, and GCO reimburses Rochester about $1.6 million annually for treatment, and about $125,000 for transmission.
And is it a similar situation with respect to the Irondequoit Bay District?
Through the chair, that's correct. Again, the percentage is roughly 24% of the total flow at Van Laer. And Irondequoit reimburses Rochester about $4 million for treatment.
Thank you. An additional Pure Waters question. In Pure Waters Administration, the chargeback for labor on page 639 shows it's $20.3 million when, excuse me, when total personnel services and benefit costs are $19.3 million. So there's $1 million difference there, and I'm wondering what would be the explanation for that.
Let's see, I gotta focus on that one. Through the chair, could you tell me the line that you're looking at?
On page 639 is the chargeback for labor, which I believe is $20.3 million. I don't have the budget right in front of me. I'm just reading from my notes. But and then on page 637 and 638, it looks like the total for personnel services and benefits costs total $19.3 million. If I'm right.
Excuse me, Legislator O'Brien, would you like a copy? I have one here.
Borrow your budget.
Through the chair, that's retirement, salaries, benefits, rolled up into that line.
Well, should the labor chargeback and the total costs for personnel services and benefit costs equal each other?
Does that number appear somewhere else at 20 million? It doesn't?
Here's administration labor. There's that. Okay. 637, 638.
Yeah. Okay. Personnel. Just personnel. Okay. Wait, but where's the?
Personnel benefit costs here should add up to 19.3. Yeah, this is 20. That's what they're charging now.
Through the chair, if we could get back to you.
Yeah, that would be
Appreciate
fine.
that, sure.
Thank you.
Are you done, Legislator O'Brien?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other further questions? Legislator Haney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few questions. Through you, as a follow-up to Legislator Hyder's question about the airport fuel facility, the debt service has been paid off. Was that the only expense in that division in the prior years? Is that why that's now zero?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Through the chair, do we operate the fuel facility out there? Or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we contract, the authority owns and operates the fuel facility, but we do contract with a fuel management company. We have like a 3-year contract. We renew it every 3 years and put it out to bid. The fuel in it is maintained by the airlines, and fuel flowage fees is also set by the airlines.
So the actual, through you, Mr. Chairman, the actual operating expenses and revenue are on the books of the operator of the fuel facility and not on the county's books?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. In solid waste, we're generating income, although it's down, from the sale of energy. With 2 questions. Why are the energy costs down? Is that a function of the economy? Is electrical consumption nationally down? Is that what's...
Through the chair, if I understand your question correctly, it's really a function of what the market will bear for what we can sell the energy for.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, as the economy recovers, would we expect that revenue would increase? Assuming that the economic recovery produces more economic activity, which uses more electricity, et cetera?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, as I understand the process, the methane gas that we use to produce the electricity, the volume of methane gas is significantly aided by the mixing of sludge from the sewage treatment plants. Since we started taking the sludge to the landfill, that somehow chemically the mixing of the sludge with the landfill stuff produces extra methane gas or something. Is that roughly correct?
Through the chair, I might characterize it that it enhances methane production rather than significantly producing it. I mean, it certainly enhances it. It's clearly a benefit.
Okay. I guess my question is then, since solid waste is benefiting from that, whether solid waste should be paying Pure Water something for the sludge.
Through the chair, I think it would be very, very difficult to try to quantify, again, the impact of the sludge in terms of the methane production. Difficult to measure. It certainly enhances the production over time, but I don't think to the extent, say, that it would, Pure Water should be paid for that. In our opinion, again, we have a reduced disposal rate at the landfill, which helps us in our ability to responsibly manage that sludge. Previously, we were incinerating that in a very costly and environmentally challenging way. So the real benefit to Pure Waters is that we have a reduced and dependable source and ability to dispose of the sludge.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, following up on Legislator Heider's question about there being nothing at least visible in the budget that the Rochester Pure Waters District is recovering fees from GCO and the Arundecoit Bay District for the operation of Van Laird. But while it's not visible in the way the numbers now flow in the budget, do I interpret from your answer that the city district is in fact being paid somehow indirectly for, by GCO and the Arundequoit Bay District for the operation of Van Lair on a proportionate basis?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, and I know I've asked this question in prior years, but it still interests me. We are using, as was pointed out by Mr. Adair, $3.9 million of the Rochester Pure Waters District fund balance in 2011, which is an increase of $300,000 from 2010. My question is, and I know I've asked this before, is why don't we use more of the fund balance so that we can actually reduce the rates? At the rate we're using the fund balance is still growing each year. Well, I'm glad we're using this much of it. As the fund balance continues to grow, shouldn't we be using more of it so that the rates can actually be reduced?
Through the chair, as you know, we monitor and manage the fund balance component of our budget very carefully and look to how we're using it in a current budget year and what the impact would be in future budget years. The most recent statement relative to the Rochester Pure Waters available fund balance is roughly $13.6 million. Again, that was at the end of 2009. So we've budgeted 3.5 to use in this current budget year, which brings that down to about $10 million roughly. We intend to use about $3.9 million in 2011, which at the end of 2011, the projected amount would be roughly $6 million. Comparing that to our operating budget of about $42 million, $43 million for Rochester, that's about 14%. Again, we like to stay in the range of about 25% if we can, roughly a quarter of our operating budget. But again, I think based on those projections, again, if we see, the fund balance growing, we'll continue to use it. I think we're responsibly managing that fund balance given how we're using it in that budget year and what the future looks like. So I would not recommend using any more fund balance based on what we are in this current budget year.
Thank you. I guess my point is that even though we've been using some of it for the last few years, at least through the end of 2009, the fund balance continues to grow. The unrestricted fund balance has grown $4.4 million from 2005 to 2009, and the unrestricted cash has grown by $10 million from 2005 to 2009. Are you saying that you think that at the end of 2010, the unrestricted fund balance will actually show a decrease?
Through the chair, based on our computations, yes. And again, we monitor that very closely and certainly respond to what the fund balance may bear. But we have reduced our personnel expenses in other areas that in the past where we had vacancies and other means by which it may have increased fund balance. We may not see that in future years. So again, we want to take it on a year-by-year basis.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Gates-Charlie-Ogden District and the Arundequoit Bay South Central District had deficits in their unrestricted fund balances at the end of 2009. The GCO deficit wasn't a lot of money, but the Arundequoit Bay South Central District deficit was $2.5 million. And although they're both budgeted to break even in 2011. At least in the case of Arundecoit Bay South Central, should we be considering a fee increase to fund those accumulated fund balance deficits?
Through the chair, I think as we've proven with the Gage-Charlie-Ogden district, which I think if you recall a couple years ago was probably in the same neighborhood of a deficit as Arundecoit is, and we have increased rates in both of those districts this past year to dig out of that particular deficit, and would anticipate that will help in 2010, but this isn't something that we're going to do in a one-year process, and by controlling expenditures in the fund itself or the district itself, we'll anticipate seeing that Arundecoit start to level off at the end of 2009 and certainly decrease the deficit in 2010 and continue from an operational standpoint in 2011 to do that based on the increased rates that we had in 2010's budget for that particular district.
So, through you, Mr. Chairman, you're anticipating that the rate structure we put in place for 2010 over the period of a couple of years will fund those deficits?
Through the chair, between that rate structure that we've put in as well as the controlling of expenditures by the various districts will eliminate that deficit.
Okay. By the same note, Mr. Chairman, the Arundecoit Bay District had a cash deficit of about $1,744,000 at December 31, 09. The other districts are basically carrying, or were at that time at least, basically carrying the Arundecoit Bay District by interfund loans. Is the way the cash system works, is Arundecoit Bay District paying interest to the other districts because of that fund cash deficit?
Through the chair, there is a calculation of that done every year as funds are borrowed between projects, between districts like that. So there is a calculation of that, and that is reimbursed ultimately, yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving into building operations, Mr. Chairman, through you, on page 649, there's an appropriation for rental of space costs in 2011 of $3,100,000. Am I correct in, from reading the leases, that about $581,000 of this is for the two parking lots on Main Street that we leased from the former Cola estate?
Through the chair, the rental expense that you're speaking of is included in a line above it for local transportation parking.
It's included in what line?
Through the chair, there's a bunch of numbers running around over here right now. 504270, the local transportation / parking line in that particular same budget area.
Oh, so it's not in 504340?
No, it's not.
Okay. Well, then the 737,000, my question still is, am I correct from reading the leases that of the 737,000, that approximately 581 is for those parking lots?
Through the chair, yes, it is.
Okay. What is the balance of, it's almost, well, I guess it's $150,000. What else are we paying $150,000 for in parking?
Through the chair, there's also a tax payment associated with those two lots that we need to make, and that's part of that appropriation as well. The rest of the detail I can provide to you in writing if necessary.
Okay, so the taxes and assessments on those parking lots is also in the 270 line as opposed to the 350 line?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Yes, I would appreciate learning how much the taxes and assessments are and if there's any utilities that we're obligated to pay in connection with that. In the line rental of space, the 504,340, which is $3,100,000, is that then all? Is there anything significant in there other than City Place and 691 St. Paul Street?
Through the chair, nothing else significant, no.
Okay. In relation to those two parking lots, why do we continue to rent those two parking lots? I mean, originally, it was believed that we might have a future use of the sites, and although the leases basically only include a right of first refusal, they don't actually contain a purchase option. But the two facilities that were contemplated as maybe going on those sites, namely the crime lab, which got built on other county-owned property, and the downtown campus for MCC, in the various newspaper stories about that project, this location has never been mentioned. Given that, why do we continue to rent these two parking lots?
Through the chair, the lease terms have not expired at this point in time. And ultimately, you're correct in the assumption that they were provided for or leased originally for the purpose of the crime lab or the potential of the downtown campus. And I just would point out that the location of the downtown campus has not been finalized at this point in time, and those two particular lots have come up in discussions previously and continue to be, I'll just say, kicked around at this point. But there has been no final determination on location yet.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as I have understood the leases, they do contain a subject to appropriation clause. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is my understanding, yes.
Right. So that while there is a lease that the administration is obligated to fulfill, if the legislature chose not to appropriate the money for that purpose, that would void the leases. Is that correct?
Through the chair, just to point out, it may void the leases, but I believe in, again, I haven't looked at the contract in recent days, but I believe there's a provision to pay out the remaining payments of the lease if it is terminated. So we would be bound to complete payments on the term of the lease upon the non-appropriation clause.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd be interested in having that looked at and getting an opinion, because that negates the whole purpose of a non-appropriation clause. If the choosing by the legislative body to implement the non-appropriation clause would trigger the immediate payment of all rental payments, it totally negates the intent of a non-appropriation clause.
Through the chair, we can have the law department look into that.
Thank you. And I've asked about this in the past, but I remain a little puzzled by it. The transfer from the general fund to City Place, is very large, and in fact, as I understand it, is actually growing from year to year. And there's a number in the budget on page 475 for $1,470,000. Well, I guess my first question, Mr. Chairman, is that $1,470,000. Am I correct that that transfer from the general fund all relates to City Place?
Through the chair, that's correct.
That transfer, the general fund subsidy is actually increasing each of the last 3 years, isn't it? Am I correct in that?
Through the chair, I don't have that particular page in front of me, but I believe that the last time I looked at it, that is a true statement. It is increasing, yes.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, why does the subsidy continually, the subsidy is big to begin with. Why does it continually increase?
Through the chair, as part of the process of going through and determining what is chargeable to the other areas, they go through and do a complete, I'll call it square footage analysis as to what is unallocated space or common space that the general fund is responsible for picking up. And during these past couple of years, different departments have given up space that has become common space at this point in time.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the flip side of the question is that the chargebacks for City Place have been steadily declining. 2.6 million in 2009, 205 million in 2010, 203 million in 2011. Why are the chargebacks steadily declining? Is the amount of vacant space steadily increasing?
Through the chair, that would be correct. As we just spoke about before, as we do the space allocation on a yearly basis, the numbers change a bit each year, and consequently, the chargeback can go up or down, and over the last couple of years has been going up.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we initiated an engineering feasibility study on the terminal building a year and a half ago or something. And I understand that study was completed and a report delivered, which I asked for about 2 months ago at one of these meetings and have not yet received. I guess, A, Mr. Chairman, I'd still like a copy of that report, but B, is there any likelihood of, has it been, we're paying an awful lot of money to rent a building which apparently is 39% vacant. Could those offices, and I realize there'd be capital costs for renovation, but could those offices be moved into the terminal building so we could cease the rental of City Place?
Through the chair, it's our understanding that that terminal building report has been released to your office for your review. So I'm not 100% sure where that's gotten lost, but if you need another copy, we can provide that. In addition to that, we have been, for the past year, going through a space committee internally in the administration to try and determine the best use of all county-owned facilities, and the terminal building being one of those is a possibility to renovate that and provide that as office space for various functions.
I guess I'll have to plead a breakdown in communications. If that's been made available, I wasn't aware of that. But I will make I will pursue that. On your presentation, on your first slide, well, I guess it's technically the second slide, where we summarize the mandated and non-mandated costs. From Monday's committee meeting, if I recall properly, we have, with the movement in 2011 of the pension and Social Security costs from non-mandated to mandated, we have made the reallocation in 210 to keep the numbers comparable. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I realize you can't give me the number today. I'd appreciate knowing what the total amount is for pension and Social Security costs that has been moved in each of the 2 years from non-mandated to mandated.
Through the chair, we can provide that.
Okay. Now, through you, Mr. Chairman, if I also recollect correctly from Monday's committee meetings, in trying to understand this chart, because of the change in the, I guess I'll say, the appropriation system.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This has anything to do with Environment and Public Works? Is that better suited for a different committee?
Well, I'll let Legislator Haney just finish his thought.
My question's a simple one, trying to understand the chart that was presented to the committee. Was a similar reclassification of the 2010 numbers done for the payments to the authorized agencies? Namely, was it removed from the numbers?
Through the chair, just as a point of clarification, because I think that this has been I'll just call it a sticking point for some folks in previous committees. The authorized agencies appropriation existed in 2010, the $1.6 million, and I may be off by a little bit for rounding, is included in the non-mandated services, as that appropriation existed as a non-mandated service. In 2011, that appropriation has been zeroed out basically because of a consistency issue from a reporting standpoint, and so while if that appropriation existed, it would still be non-mandated, but it is no longer included because it is zero in the budget at this particular point in time. So in 2011, there is zero appropriations in non-mandated for authorized agencies.
Right. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the numbers then are not comparable, are they?
Through the chair, probably what I will recall is a very debatable position from the seat that you're sitting in compared to the seat that I'm sitting in. But the appropriation of $1.6 million existed as a non-mandated charge in 2010, and it no longer exists in 2011. So it is appropriate to classify it the way that we have shown it here.
Okay, thank you. Your chart number 7 that was presented to the committee, which shows that 18% is non-mandated and 82% is mandated. I have tried very hard to come up with those percentages from the data on page 43, where the mandated and non-mandated are summarized. Could someone over the next couple of days prepare something that shows how those percentages are derived from the data on page 43?
Through the chair, we can do that.
Okay. And I believe, Mr. Chairman, that completes the questions that I have, and I appreciate the staff's cooperation in answering the questions.
Are there any further questions? Okay, well, thank you, Director Adair, for your presentation, and thank you, the rest of the administration, for your also input in this, and any of the questions that were asked. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. You have the October 27th, 2010 minutes of the Environment and Public Works Committee before you. They will stand approved unless the clerk is notified of any changes by the end of the day. The next item on the agenda is new business. Madam Clerk.
Referral 10-332.
Moved by Legislator Barker, seconded by Legislator Howland. Any questions? Any discussion? Legislator Colby.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, how many companies put a bid in on this project? We're talking about the jail elevators, if we're on the same page.
Through the chair, we submitted a request for proposals to 5 firms and received proposals from 2.
Was there any engineering done before the proposals came in that gave you a cost estimate? And was that done through you, Mr. Chairman?
Through the chair, I understand that we have some approximated costs we've used for our funding planning in the CIP, and we estimate the project at about $1 million total.
And so this came in, project, million. It's lower, it's 200. There must be other parts of the project then, when you, of that figure you're quoting, is that correct?
Through the chair, this actual request is for engineering services for the project. So again, I'm referring to consultant proposals we received and an engineering fee that's been proposed to provide the design and construction services.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carried. Next item, Madam Clerk.
Referral 10-333.
Moved by
amend.
Legislator Colby, seconded by Legislator Howland. Any discussion? I believe you were first, Legislator Hyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the administration. Recently in the media, there was a report that an average of 2 accidents a week occur for City of Rochester vehicles. I'm wondering if there are any comparable stats for the county's fleet.
Through the chair.
I'm going to grant it.
Rates?
Well, we're talking about increasing the labor rate for the fleet services and the people that are driving them.
So you're, could you just clarify a little further the point, the correlation between the two?
I mean, what I was interested was, is there any accident rates available? I can ask that under other business if you prefer. I mean,
Legislator Colby has a point. It's not really apropos to this, but I guess it would be more appropriate under other business, but since you're going to be asking it anyways, you might as well just do it now. Go ahead.
so do we have any, through you, Mr. Chair, any comparable rates?
Through the chair, I don't have that information available. Would have to get back to you.
Thank you.
on that.
And as a follow-up, what will there be public authorities that will be included in this agreement in any LDCs?
Through the chair, public authorities, but not LDCs.
Okay. And can you provide a list of all the public authorities that will be included?
Through the chair, it's really open to any public authority that wishes to participate in this, so there's really no restriction.
All right, thank you.
Are you finished?
Yes, I'm
okay.
off.
Legislator Haney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I assume that the Comptroller's Office staff has done a cost accounting analysis and that these rates we're now proposing will totally cover all of our costs?
Through the chair, we surveyed the marketplace and feel very comfortable this will cover our costs and any overhead incidentals associated with that. Again, we've had very little demand for maintenance from outside entities. In fact, I think to date we've only had one municipality request maintenance service. It was actually the Village of Pittsford. But again, we wanted to establish a rate that we thought was fair and reasonable and would give us the opportunity to adjust that rate if we felt and determined that it wasn't covering all of our cost.
So, through you, Mr. Chairman, basically, except for that case you cited, nobody else in the county is availing themselves of this service and this facility?
Through the chair, that is correct, and we expect that there will be other agencies. I know MCC is interested because of our ability to outfit vehicles for law enforcement purposes. They're interested. I think many of the public workshops are quite a distance away from our fleet garage and don't necessarily avail themselves of that opportunity, or they're doing the work themselves directly. I would expect periodic requests for specialized work like sewer vectors or tub grinders, things of that nature. But again, we haven't had obviously a significant demand.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I guess I find that a little disappointing. I realize you can't drive people in, but it just seems that other entities would see an advantage to using your facilities. I guess I'm a little disappointed by that. I mean, that's not a criticism of you. That's not, you can't force them to do business with you, but I guess it's just a little disappointing. Thank you.
Legislator Colby.
For you, Mr. Chairman, I think the question has already been answered, but I'll ask a different way. How many billable hours per year have you seen for this service? And I think you already answered the question.
Through the chair, I don't have the billable hours, but I think the bill was $3,700 for the repair that we've done.
Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carried. Next item, Madam Clerk.
Referral 10-345.
Moved by Legislator Barker, seconded by Legislator Howland. Any discussion? Legislator Haney.
Mr. Chairman, I had prepared a 20-minute oration on the history of why the county took over the city sewer system in 1970, but given the hour, I'll pass on delivering it. But if anybody would like to buy me a drink later, I'd be more than glad to share the history with them.
Is there any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carried. Are there any other matters to come before the committee? Well, it looks like we've come to the end of our committee cycle for year 2010. Seems like we just started, and we're already at the end. So there be no further business. The December 1st, 2010 meeting of the Environment and Public Works Committee stands adjourned. The next meeting will be January 5th, 2011 at 4:30 p.m. Thank you, and happy holidays.